Macroeconomics. What is macroeconomics? Macroeconomics is a branch of economics that studies how an overall economy, the market, or other systems that operate on a large scale behaves. Macroeconomics studies economy-wide phenomena such as inflation, price levels, rate of economic growth, national income, gross domestic product (GDP), and changes in unemployment. Some of the key questions addressed by macroeconomics include: what causes unemployment? What causes inflation? What creates or stimulates economic growth? Macroeconomics attempts to measure how well an economy is performing, to understand what forces drive it, and to project how performance can improve. Macroeconomics deals with the performance, structure, and behavior of the entire economy, in contrast to microeconomics, which is more focused on the choices made by individual actors in the economy, like people, households, industries, etc. Key takeaways. Macroeconomics is the branch of economics that deals with the structure, performance, behavior, and decision-making of the whole, or aggregate, economy. The two main areas of macroeconomic research are long-term economic growth and shorter-term business cycles. Macroeconomics in its modern form is often defined as starting with John Maynard Keynes and his theories about market behavior and governmental policies in the 1930s. Several schools of thought have developed since. In contrast to macroeconomics, microeconomics is more focused on the influences on and choices made by individual actors in the economy, people, companies, industries, etc. Understanding macroeconomics. There are two sides of the study of economics: macroeconomics and microeconomics. As the term implies, macroeconomics looks at the overall big picture scenario of the economy, but simply it focuses on the way the economy performs as a whole and then analyzes how different sectors of the economy relate to one another to understand how the aggregate functions. This includes looking at variables like unemployment, GDP, and inflation. Macroeconomists develop models explaining relationships between these factors. Such macroeconomic models and the forecasts they produce are used by government entities to aid in the construction and evaluation of economic, monetary, and fiscal policy, by businesses to set strategy in domestic and global markets, and by investors to predict and plan for movements in various asset classes. Given the enormous scale of government budgets and the impact of economic policy on consumers and businesses, macroeconomics clearly concerns itself with significant issues. Properly applied economic theories can offer illuminating insights on how economies function and the long-term consequences of particular policies and decisions. Macroeconomic theory can also help individual businesses and investors make better decisions through a more thorough understanding of the effects of broad economic trends and policies on their own industries. Limits of macroeconomics. It's also important to understand the limitations of economic theory. Theories are often created in a vacuum and lack certain real-world details, like taxation, regulation, and transaction costs. The real world is also decidedly complicated and includes matters of social preference and conscience that do not lend themselves to mathematical analysis. Even with the limits of economic theory, it is important and worthwhile to follow the major macroeconomic indicators like GDP, inflation, and unemployment. The performance of companies and by extension their stocks is significantly influenced by the economic conditions in which the companies operate, and the study of macroeconomic statistics can help an investor make better decisions and spot turning points. Likewise, it can be invaluable to understand which theories are in favor and influencing a particular government administration. The underlying economic principles of a government will say much about how that government will approach taxation, regulation, government spending, and similar policies. By better understanding economics and the ramifications of economic decisions, investors can get at least a glimpse of the probable future and act accordingly with confidence. Areas of macroeconomic research. Macroeconomics is a rather broad field, but two specific areas of research are representative of this discipline. The first area is the factors that determine long-term economic growth or increases in the national income. The other involves the causes and consequences of short-term fluctuations in national income and employment, also known as the business cycle. Economic growth. Economic growth refers to an increase in aggregate production in an economy. Macroeconomists try to understand the factors that either promote or retard economic growth in order to support economic policies that will support development, progress, and rising living standards. Adam Smith's classic 18th century work, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, which advocated free trade, laissez-faire economic policy, and expanding the division of labor, was arguably the first and certainly one of the seminal works in this body of research. By the 20th century, macroeconomists began to study growth with more formal mathematical models. Growth is commonly modeled as a function of physical capital, human capital, labor force, and technology. Business cycles. Superimposed over long-term macroeconomic growth trends, the levels and rates of change of major macroeconomic variables such as employment and national output go through occasional fluctuations up or down, expansions and recessions in a phenomenon known as the business cycle. The 2008 financial crisis is a clear recent example, and the Great Depression of the 1930s was actually the impetus for the development of most modern macroeconomic theory.